The Cold War is often described as a conflict that ended because one side finally lost the strength to continue. That version is clean. It suggests that pressure accumulates until collapse becomes unavoidable. It reassures us that power behaves predictably, that dominance erodes in visible stages, that history moves toward resolution through exhaustion or defeat. Yet the final years of the Cold War leave behind a quieter contradiction. The system dissolved while its instruments of force remained intact. Armies stood ready. Nuclear arsenals stayed deployed. Borders were still defended. What changed was not the ability to command, but the willingness to enforce. And that shift did not arrive as a single announcement. It arrived as a decision repeated quietly, until its consequences became irreversible. The Cold War was not merely a standoff between states. It was an architecture of authority. Two rival systems claimed legitimacy over how societies should be governed, how obedience should be structured, and how power should be justified. Each side built institutions to translate ideology into routine behavior: military alliances, security services, economic frameworks, information controls. These institutions were designed to reduce uncertainty. They narrowed acceptable choices. They punished deviation. Stability emerged not from trust, but from predictability enforced by consequence. The belief at the center of this structure was simple. If authority relaxed its grip, the system would unravel. This inquiry does not follow the Cold War as a sequence of crises or summits. It does not trace victory through economic output or military expenditure. It examines how authority reached a point where enforcement no longer preserved legitimacy, and how restraint, once treated as weakness, became the decisive force. The question is not who won, but what kind of power chose to stop. By the late 20th century, the Cold War had become familiar. Its dangers were extreme, but its rhythms were known. Each side understood the rituals that prevented escalation. Proxy conflicts flared and cooled. Diplomatic language hardened into formula. Within the Soviet sphere, authority rested on centralized control and inherited legitimacy. The system claimed continuity with revolutionary purpose, wartime sacrifice, and ideological certainty. It had survived invasion, internal terror, and global rivalry. Its durability appeared to confirm its necessity. Yet beneath this appearance, pressure accumulated without relief. Economic coordination grew rigid. Innovation lagged. Informal systems replaced official ones. Public speech diverged from private belief. Authority still commanded obedience, but obedience no longer produced coherence. Decisions traveled downward through institutions, but feedback rarely returned upward intact. The system functioned, but it no longer learned. For decades, force compensated for this imbalance. Intervention reinforced allied regimes. Dissent was managed, contained, or suppressed. Authority maintained its reach by demonstrating that resistance carried cost. But force carries its own erosion. Each act of enforcement narrows the margin for adjustment. Each suppression confirms dependence on coercion rather than consent. By the 1980s, the tools that had preserved order threatened to exhaust it. The leadership that inherited this structure confronted a dilemma shaped by institutional memory. Every previous crisis had been resolved through reinforcement. More control, more discipline, more pressure. Reform was dangerous because it introduced uncertainty. Retreat was dangerous because it invited challenge. Authority was trapped between preserving form and preserving viability. What changed was not the external threat, but the internal calculation of consequence. Military intervention remained possible, but its cost had escalated beyond control. Nuclear parity ensured that ultimate force could not be used to resolve political legitimacy. Economic stagnation limited the ability to absorb prolonged confrontation. Authority began to recognize that enforcement no longer guaranteed stability. It merely delayed fragmentation. The critical decision did not arrive as a declaration of surrender. It arrived as a redefinition of what power was meant to protect. Rather than treating ideological control as non-negotiable, leadership began to prioritize systemic survival. This required restraint. It required tolerating outcomes that previous generations would have crushed immediately. It required accepting loss of influence in exchange for reducing existential risk. This decision expressed itself through behavior rather than rhetoric. Censorship loosened. Internal debate widened. External intervention slowed, then stopped. When unrest emerged in allied states, the expected response did not come. Tanks remained in their depots. Orders were delayed. Silence replaced command. From a traditional view of authority, this appeared as weakness. But from within the system, it was framed as adaptation. Power was no longer measured by the ability to impose uniformity, but by the ability to prevent catastrophe. Restraint became a strategy rather than a failure. The moment that revealed this shift most clearly did not involve negotiations between superpowers. It involved the absence of intervention when intervention was expected. As political movements gained momentum across Eastern Europe, regimes that had relied on external backing faced a sudden vacuum. Their legitimacy had always been conditional, sustained by the knowledge that force stood behind them. When that force did not arrive, their authority fractured almost instantly. This was not because opposition suddenly became stronger. It was because the structure that sustained obedience lost coherence. Once it became clear that enforcement was no longer guaranteed, institutions designed around that guarantee collapsed under their own weight. Power did not disappear. It withdrew. No treaty announced this withdrawal. No formal document declared the Cold War finished. Yet the system that defined it had already crossed a threshold. Authority had chosen restraint in a context where restraint carried systemic consequence. The conflict did not end through resolution. It ended through abandonment of enforcement as a governing principle. This choice carried risks that were fully understood. Without intervention, allied states would diverge. Influence would diminish. Outcomes would become unpredictable. Authority accepted these risks because the alternative, continued enforcement, threatened something more fundamental: the viability of the system itself. The Cold War ended without a war because power recognized its own limits, not moral limits alone, but structural ones. Institutions designed to impose order had reached a point where they could no longer adapt without destroying what they governed. The aftermath was not orderly. Borders shifted, economies destabilized, social guarantees dissolved faster than replacements could form, power fragmented. Authority that had once been centralized diffused into negotiation, improvisation, and exposure. From the outside, this looked like peaceful transition. From within, it felt like disorientation. Institutions that had organized meaning lost their force. Obedience no longer carried the same consequence. Legitimacy had to be renegotiated rather than assumed. The Cold War ended quietly, but its residue reshaped the global order. This raises a deeper question about how authority functions over time. If power depends on the credible threat of enforcement, what happens when enforcement becomes too costly to sustain? If legitimacy is preserved through structures that resist feedback, how does authority recognize when those structures no longer serve their purpose? The decision that ended the Cold War was not framed as philosophical insight. It was framed as necessity. Yet necessity alters the meaning of power. It transforms command into restraint. It replaces dominance with management of risk. Authority survives, but it no longer guarantees outcomes. It negotiates them. For the listener, the disturbance lies in recognizing how rarely power ends through collapse alone. More often, it ends through recalibration, through decisions that appear cautious in the moment but carry irreversible consequence, through restraint exercised not because authority has disappeared, but because it understands the cost of its own continuation. The Cold War is often treated as a closed chapter, a resolved rivalry. But the pattern it reveals remains active. Authority still confronts moments where enforcement and legitimacy diverge. Institutions still face thresholds where control erodes faster than coherence can be restored. Power still encounters situations where the most decisive act is not command, but refusal to command. What remains unresolved is whether authority can ever withdraw without hollowing the systems it leaves behind, whether legitimacy can survive once enforcement is suspended, and whether the most consequential decisions in history are always visible as acts of force, or whether they more often take the form of restraint that quietly reshapes the world. The Cold War ended without a war, but it did not end without cost. And it did not end without revealing something enduring about power. That authority is defined not only by what it can do, but by what it chooses, finally, not to do. If you found meaning here, you're welcome to explore more on Timeless Questions, where we examine history not for answers, but for understanding.